So here we are back at the sewing machine. I've got all my elements for the cards made. We've got, this is my back piece, my inside piece. This is going to be my front piece, and then my tree all layered together. And I've got these all grouped together in different arrangements, so no two are exactly alike. And then I'm going to put these tags on the back of each one. And so the first thing I'm going to sew together is the tag, because it's going to leave the back of the stitching on one side of it, which I'm going to cover up with this piece. So that has to be, the tag has to be the first layer, because I'll put that here and then the stitching will show through the back. So let's get our tags going. Oops, I don't need this piece. I need this one. So this is going to be the back of my card, and I'm going to layer my tag on there. I'm just, again, just eyeballing it to make sure it's about the right place. And I've got my white thread in both the bobbin and the spool. I've got my stitching set to the straight stitch, which is number 1 on my machine. And then I'm just going to sew it on. And like I did on the trees, I'm going to start kind of in the middle, just so I'm not starting at a corner. I like my start and end to be in the middle. I don't know why, it doesn't really make a difference. Oh, one trick I forgot was make sure you start with this little piece raised, otherwise your thread will pull out of the needle. Okay, so let's sew this on. I'm just doing a straight stitch all the way around, turning at the corners. And if you leave your needle down when you turn, it makes it easy to keep in a nice straight corner. But I don't always remember to do that. Not a big deal. Okay. There's that. Down the last side. And I'm pulling the loose threads to the bottom just to keep them out of the way. I don't want to sew them down. And finishing up. I'm going to try and overlap this stitch with the one I started with, and then do a little back stitching on it just to secure the stitches. And then I pull it off. Oops. And cut it on my cutter over on the side, and there we go. We've got it sewed down. So as you can see that white stitching on the back, but that will be covered up once I sew this piece on. Okay, so I have switched out my white thread for red. I'm going to change my stitch back to the zigzag stitch, which is number 2 on my machine. So there's that. And the first thing I'm going to do is sew my white layers onto my red layers, just so they are, you know, all one piece. And then I'm gonna put them all together. So the first thing I need to do is trim up the edges of these white layers. It's been a while since I've cut them out. They've started to fray a little bit just because they're raw edges. So I'm grabbing my little snippers. These are like, I think they're super sharp, like Fiskars. I can't remember exactly what they're called. And I'm just really quickly trimming off any loose ends. But do be careful with these scissors. They're very, very sharp. They're great, but sharp. Okay, so now I'm going to, oops, clean off any loose thread scraps from my white, just so they're not layered in there. And then line up the white piece on top of the red, just about even. Again, always just eyeballing it. I'm not being too precious with this, I guess. And then I'm going to load it into my machine, put my foot down, my presser foot down, and then start sewing. And again, starting in the bottom middle, same reason as always, make sure my little lever is raised there, and we can go. And so I'm just doing this nice zigzag over the edge to hold it down and keep it from fraying. I'm trying to be careful at the corners and keep my needle down so I can turn the corner easily. But when I'm going down the edges, I can go pretty fast. And then coming up on the corner again. Okay. And back down. Final turn. And back to middle. Meeting up with my previous stitching, doing a little back stitching. And there we go. So that one's sewn on, and as you can see, that white stitching is covered up. I've got my patch on the back, that's sewn down to the front. I'm gonna trim off my loose threads, which I did for the tag as well, off screen. Okay, and so the back piece of my card is done. Now let's do the front. And so when I'm sewing these on, I have one fabric that the orientation of it matters. Most of them don't, so I always check the back to make sure I'm doing it right side up. And we'll just eyeball that. Oops, that's a loose thread from the red. Okay. And then we'll do the same thing, making sure to raise that bit up. And here we go. Sometimes I've been doing a little back stitching at the beginning. I haven't been super consistent about that, but I think it's fine. Okay. And all of you out there who sew, I'm curious if when people find out that you sew, or if they see you using your sewing machine, do they ask you, oh, aren't you afraid you're gonna sew your fingers? I feel like I get asked that all the time, and my answer is always no, I'm not afraid at all, because I've got this huge foot around where the needle goes in. I know exactly where the needle's gonna go in, and so I just don't put my hands in there. In fact, most of the time I just guide things with one hand, since most of the stuff I do is just straight lines. But no, I have never once been afraid that I'm gonna sew my fingers, because I mean, you have complete control over how fast it's going. There's only 1 or 2 spots that the needle comes down, and they're always within the foot. So yeah, not scared at all. Okay, and there is that layer sewn on. We'll let that go and trim up our edges, or trim our loose threads. Okay, and so we've got those 2 sewn on. So the next thing I'm going to do is sew around the edges of each of these to make sure that they don't fray, and then I'm going to sew them together on this edge. So like we did with the white layer, I need to trim off the fraying ends of the red. So I'm going to do that real quickly. All right, that looks good. So now I'm going to sew along these 3 edges of both layers and just do a zigzag stitch along the edge, kind of overlapping. So I'll start with the inside piece, just lower the foot, and so, oops, there we go, almost pulled my thread out. Do a little back stitch at the end just to secure the stitches. And for these layers, I've been chain stitching, I guess is what you call it. So instead of pulling it out and cutting the thread for each one, I just go straight into the next layer. I think it saves a little thread, saves a little time, and then I'll just cut them apart later. That's a really handy trick for when you're doing a lot of quilting, since you do so many small pieces. Oops, I didn't mean to back stitch at that corner, but it's fine. All right, let's do our back stitching there. And if I had more cards ready to go, I'd just keep chaining, have a whole long chain of these together. But since I'm only doing one right now, we'll cut it off. And so we'll trim the two ends. One. And two. And then snip them apart here at the thread where they're together. Snip. Okay, and then I'm going to layer these two, and actually it needs a tiny bit more trimming. Put them together like that, line up the edges so they're pretty even, and then sew down this end. Raise my little foot up again. Okay, back stitching here, which I want to make sure I do my back stitching on this part because this is going to be the fold of the card, so it's going to get some, I don't know, stress on it when you open it up. Okay. All right. And there's that. We'll trim and trim our loose ends. And there is our card all put together. So we've got our patch on the back, the tree sewn on the front, and then the inside piece. And it's a nice stable card. And like it even stands up pretty well. I can't see. Let me put the camera down. So yeah, it stands up just like a paper card. And we're almost done. We've got one little step left, which is putting our date on the card. All right, so we're at the last step of making these cards. So I've got a batch that I finished today, both some with buttons and some without. And the very last step is stamping the date on the card. And I like to stamp the date that they were completed. So I don't stamp that until the very end. And so that's what we're gonna do now. Today is December 3rd. So we're going to get that date on there. So I've got my cards, I've got my ink, and I've got my date stamper. So we'll set this to December 3rd, which, you know, is very easy. I think I'm going the wrong direction. There's the 0. And a 3. And 2022. All right. So I just lay out a few at a time. And the ones with the buttons are a little harder because they're not a flat surface. But, I mean, still not hard. This ink's really saturated, easy to use. So I just grab my stamper, do a quick little tap, and stamp my date on there. So we've got December 3rd, 2022. Let me do that for each of those. And then I put them off to the side, kind of layering it. Actually, this might be off camera. So I layer it so that the dates aren't laying on top of each other, just in case any of the ink bleeds. I don't think it will, but that's just for safety. All right, do the rest of the button ones. Make sure you are holding your stamp right side up. Okay. And then last but not least are ones without the buttons, which are easier just because there's no, they're very flat against the cutting mat. And that's it. So now these cards are complete, ready to send out. And I think they look great. All right, that's it for this year, and I hope you have a Merry Christmas.